Hello, Brubs. We're back with The Madness of Mary Lincoln by Jason Emerson. We're on chapter 6. And the one reason why I hate having a light up above is that it reflects onto the cover. So there's that, but it's a small price to pay here, I guess. Inkster, Michigan, December 22nd, 1909. 6. It does not appear that God is good. Myra Bradwell has become known as the woman who orchestrated Mary Lincoln's release from Bellevue Place Sanitarium, and not without reason. She was somewhat of a female icon in her day, and we will be back there in a second. I did not have my book properly placed, so we'll start again. Chapter 6. It does not appear that God is good. Myra Bradwell has become known as the woman who orchestrated Mary Lincoln's release from Bellevue Place Sanitarium, and not without reason. She was somewhat of a female icon in her day. Bradwell was an activist for numerous causes such as female suffrage and fair legal treatment for women, and counted among her friends such luminaries as Susan B. Anthony and Mary Livermore. Not only was she America's first woman lawyer, but also was the founder, publisher, and editor-in-chief of the prestigious and widely read Chicago Legal News. Myra Bradwell did more to create rights for women and other legally handicapped persons than did any other woman of her day, and perhaps any day, stated her sole biographer. But in July 1875, this feminist hero was now looking for another cause or fight with either Dr. Patterson or Robert Lincoln. In fact, her friendship with Mary Lincoln, Myra Bradwell seems to have made no attempts to write to or visit Mary Lincoln at Bellevue Place during the widow's first 2 months there. The reason is unknown. Perhaps Bradwell was preoccupied publishing the Chicago Legal News, or maybe she simply believed, as she later explicitly stated, that her friend was insane, so she chose to give the physicians time to ply their trade. What is now known, however, due to the discovery of Mary Lincoln's lost insanity letters, is that Myra Bradwell was not the instigator. She has come to be credited as she certainly was a willing and extremely accomplice, but it was Mary herself who created and directed her plot for freedom. Inside Bellevue Place, Mary Lincoln sequestered herself from most of society, as she did during her European sojourn in 1868, and would do again after being declared sane in 1876. Initially, she did not reach out to Myra Bradwell. Both Dr. Patterson and the Post and Mail reporter attested that Mary refused all visitors during her first 2 months at the sanitarium, and the eagerness with which she asked the reporters about her Chicago friends indicates she was not in communication with them. Mary had, up to that point, expressed no displeasure at being at Bellevue Place during her time there, and while she suffered hours or bouts of depression, she had made no mention of being uncomfortable, confined, or in any way desirous of freedom from her situation. I mean, she did attempt to kill herself before she went, and she also begged her son not to take her there. Robert even reported more than once that his mother was always happy to see him and seemed pleased with her surroundings. Then suddenly on July 15, after a visit from Robert and his daughter, Mary told Dr. Patterson she wanted to live with her sister, Elizabeth Edwards, in Springfield, Illinois. The notation in the Bellevue Daily Patient Progress report suggests Mary's statement was regarded skeptically. This sister, we understand, she might have lived with any time, but has not even felt friendly toward her, Mrs. L. said. It is the most natural thing in the world to wish to live with my sister. She raised me, and I regard her as a sort of mother. This last was certainly true. After the death of their mother, Elizabeth Todd, the oldest child by 5 years played a motherly role to her younger siblings, even to the point of finding husbands for three of them. Yet, in the later White House years, Mary had become estranged from Elizabeth due to a family feud regarding government patronage, and the two barely spoke throughout the following decade. So, why did Mary suddenly change her mind about her situation? And did she change her mind about living at Bellevue or about keeping quiet about not wanting to live there? No known evidence gives an explicit answer. The Bellevue patient log shows she had no visitors and received no mail. Mary's seclusion likely was motivated by her embarrassment at being declared insane and her resulting self pity from feelings of abandonment by family and friends. What seems likely is that upon learning her Chicago friends were thinking of her, Mary realized she was not alone after all. In fact, her friends were powerful people. James Bradwell, Mary's unofficial legal advisor, was a former county court judge and current member of the state legislature. Myra Bradwell was a renowned activist and publisher, and John Franklin Farnsworth, a Chicago attorney originally from nearby St. Charles, Illinois, had been a Union general during the Civil War and a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from 1857 to 61 and 1863 to 1873, and had been present at Abraham Lincoln's deathbed in 1865. Mary must have decided that if these people were thinking of her, then perhaps they would help her. Robert Lincoln said more than once that his mother would do anything to accomplish a goal. She decided on it. Once she decided on it. After Mrs. Rain's visit, Mary realized a newfound or newly emerged sense of victimization, which caused her to begin a campaign to secure her freedom. When Robert next visited his mother on July 28th, Mary told him of her desire to live in Springfield. Robert did not think it prudent for Mary to leave Bellevue, but he did think a visit was a good idea. He had, in fact, been telling his mother for years that she needed to make amends with her sisters. He encouraged her to write to Elizabeth Edwards and suggest a visit. After Robert left Bellevue that day, Mary asked Dr. Patterson if she could mail the letter to her sister. At the post office, Mary got out of the carriage and deposited the letter herself, an otherwise nominal item, probably noteworthy in the daily patient progress report, only because the staff saw her increased initiative as a sign of improvement. Later events would show, however, that Mary's initiative at the post office was actually an act of deceit. The next day, Mary received three visitors suddenly concerned about her incarceration. Both Dr. Patterson and Robert Lincoln believed Mary must have mailed multiple letters to various people the evening before, rather than one letter to her sister, as she said. Subsequent historians have repeated this contention. The discovery of Mary's lost letters, however, proves this to be untrue. The earliest found letter from Mary's stay at the sanitarium was, in fact, the first letter she wrote to the Bradwells, dated July 28th, 1875, the day Robert visited and Mary practiced her deceitful mailing. The letter shows that Mary Lincoln did not write multiple letters that day, but just one to James Bradwell. May I request you to come out here just so soon as you receive this note? Please bring out your dear wife, Mrs. William Sturgis, and any other friend. Can you not be here tomorrow on the noon train? Also, bring Mr. W.F. Story with you. I am sure you will not disappoint me. Drive up to the house. Also telegraph to General Farnsworth to meet you here. Mary's anxious state of mind is evident in her uncharacteristically large and shaky handwriting. The presence of ink spots, or possibly wiped teardrops on the page, an inner postscript in which she offers to pay for Judge Bradwell's travel expenses, an abnormal offer from the usually penurious widow. The fact that Mary Lincoln addressed her call for help to the Bradwells makes sense. James Bradwell was her attorney. Myra Bradwell was her good friend, and both were influential people. One interesting revelation from this letter is Mary's request for Wilbert F. Story. Story was the editor of the Chicago Times, the most sensationalist newspaper in Chicago. He had been an anti war copperhead during the Civil War and made the Times one of the most vituperative critics of the Lincoln administration. Post war, the Times was an outspoken reporter and critic of Chicago society. Story's motto was to print the news and raise hell. Mary's request to speak with the controversial editor shows that she understood, and here's her letter, apparently. Mary Lincoln's first letter from Bellevue Place Sanitarium seeking help in obtaining her release. I don't know about shaky handwriting. It looks pretty damn fucking solid to me. I mean, maybe in a few spots, but I mean, that might just be her, the way she writes her L's. Doesn't look shaky at all to me. The need to harness the power of the press in her cause. It also shows that the inception of the frontal public assault on her incarceration was Mary's idea and not Myra Bradwell's idea, as had been previously supposed. For her to rely on a man who had previously criticized her idolized husband shows to what lengths she would go to achieve her goal. Mary's friends did not arrive at Bellevue all at once, however, leading to the enormous surmise that she had written separate letters. Farnsworth was the first to appear at Bellevue during the afternoon of July 29. He stated that Mary wants her liberty and she wanted him to help her, although she did not complain about her treatment. Farnsworth thought she looked better than the last time he saw her. He thinks she does not talk like a sane woman, but still she would hardly be called insane by those who used to know her. He thinks that she has been on the border of insanity for many years. The patient progress report noted Farnsworth suggested Mary be set free, but Robert maintained control of her money and property, under which arrangement she could not do much harm. That afternoon, Mary wrote a letter she said was to her old washerwoman, but in reality it contained letters to other past friends seeking help. Dr. Patterson forwarded the letter to Robert Lincoln. During the evening, James and Myra Bradwell arrived at Bellevue. Myra told Dr. Patterson that even though she believed Mary was not quite right, she thought the widow should be allowed to be at home and have tender, loving care. Dr. Patterson did not seem to be upset by the visits of Farnsworth or the Bradwells. He was probably accustomed to family and friends of his patients offering suggestions about treatment and early release. The patient progress report shows Mary was very much afraid. Dr. Patterson would never trust her again because of her letter writing deceit, and the day after the Bradwells' visit, she asked that she be allowed to send a letter to Myra Bradwell. Dr. Patterson told Mary she was at liberty to write where she pleased and to whom she pleased, but that she ought to be open about it. He also said he felt it proper to forward any letters she wrote to persons unknown to him to her legal conservator, Robert, for review. Mary thought this fair and right. The next day, July 31st, Mary stayed in her room and did nothing worth noting in the Bellevue Daily Report. James and Myra Bradwell were not idle on their return from Batavia. The next day, they wrote letters to Mary's sister, Elizabeth Edwards, and her cousin, John Todd Stewart. These letters, among the cachet of newly discovered materials, suggest that either Mary greatly exaggerated her suffering to the Bradwells or the Bradwells wrote with hyperbole. Most likely, it was a little of both. James Bradwell told Stewart that Mary feels lonesome and that the restraint of the place is unendurable. You're welcome, bruv. Myra Bradwell told Elizabeth Edwards that Mary feels her incarceration most terribly and desires to get out from behind the gates and bars. This last, which was untrue, is a charge both Bradwells would later make to newspapers as well. The Bradwells suggested their correspondence visit Mary at the sanitarium and that Mary accompany her sister back to Springfield for a short visit. I cannot feel that it is necessary to keep her thus restrained, Myra Bradwell wrote. Perhaps I do not look at the matter rightly, but let this be my excuse. I love her most tenderly and feel sorry to see one heartache added to her already overburdened soul. Mrs. Edwards's reply to Myra Bradwell, also found amid the lost letters, shows that Elizabeth felt the same as the Bradwells and General Farnsworth, namely that Mary was not sane, but that it was improper to place her in a sanitarium. Had I been consulted, I would have remonstrated earnestly against the steps taken, Edwards wrote. She thought her sister simply needed a personal attendant and companion. The judgment of others must now, I presume, be silently acquiesced in for a time in the hope that ere long her physical and mental condition will be improved by rest and medical treatment. Elizabeth could not visit Mary since she was recovering from a recent surgical operation, but felt it would do her sister good to visit friends. No response from John Todd Stewart to James Bradwell is known to exist. Now, with a sympathetic friend with whom to commiserate and a goal to achieve, Mary kept in close contact with Myra Bradwell, pouring out her sorrows and frustrations and continually requesting help. Mary was trying to amass an army of supporters to come to her aid, and she repeatedly asked Myra to contact old friends. On August 2nd alone, Mary asked Myra to contact 6 people. She also lamented, "It does not appear that God is good to have placed me here. I endeavor to read my Bible and offer up my petitions 3 times a day, but my afflicted heart fails me, and my voice often falters in prayer. I have worshipped my son, and no unpleasant word ever passed between us, yet I cannot understand why I should have been brought out here." Most interesting, however, is that the letter shows Mary's mania for clothing had not abated, for she asked that Myra on her next visit bring samples of black alpaca, a best quality, without luster and without cotton, as well as samples of heavier black woolen goods. Mary's agitation is obvious in the next letter she wrote to Myra Bradwell, which, although undated, appears to have been written also on August the 2nd. It sounds much the same as the first letter. It frantically repeats and demands and even begs 5 times for Myra and James Bradwell to come visit Bellevue, and again requests Myra to contact 3 of Mary's old friends and her sister. Elizabeth Edwards, "Without doubt you will not forget me," Mary wrote. "God will not fail to reward you if you do not fail to visit the widow of Abraham Lincoln in her solitude. Come, come is the watchword. This letter is interesting as well, in that it is the first letter that offers insight into Mary's feelings about her son. If I have used excited words in reference to my son, may God forgive me, and may you both forget it. The widow's repentance shows that she was very excited when telling the Bradwells of her situation, but also that her feelings for Robert were not calloused. However, she knew that Robert thought her desire for clothing was symptomatic of mania, and so she closed her letter to Myra with the warnings to keep her request for dress materials a secret, writing, "You will understand." Mary's recently discovered letters do much to illuminate the inception of her quest for freedom. From the sanitarium and the public controversy that was about to erupt, in particular, they reveal the inner machinations of Mary and the Bradwells, the tenor of their conversations during visits, and Mary's growing antipathy toward Robert. Perhaps most important, Mary's tendency to be agitated and her preoccupation with buying new clothing were still present and were even being aggravated by the Bradwells. There is no doubt that Myra Bradwell was advocating for Mary's release, fomenting thoughts of it in the widow's mind, and cooperating with her in laying plans for a public campaign. On August 6th, during a visit to Bellevue, Myra had a long discussion with Dr. Patterson, during which she told the doctor distinctly that she had no doubt that Mrs. Lincoln was insane and had been for some time, but she doubted the propriety of keeping her in an asylum for the insane. She spent the night with Mary in her room and the next morning again advised Dr. Patterson that Mary should be allowed to live at the Edwards' home in Springfield. By this point, Robert and Dr. Patterson had become suspicious of the effects of the Bradwells' visits. Myra had become so bold in her assertions of the need for Mary's freedom that she even showed Dr. Patterson the letter she had received from Elizabeth Edwards condemning Mary's commitment and told him to show it to Robert. This caused Robert to write the longest, most revealing letter of the entire episode to his aunt, explaining his actions. There is no need of my rehearsing 10 years of our domestic history. If it has caused you 1/10 of the grief it has caused me, you will remember it, Robert wrote. He considered it a blessing to put his mother at Bellevue, the facility and the superintendent of which he described at length. Robert also criticized the interference of Myra Bradwell, saying he felt the quiet and absence of any chance of excitement at the sanitarium had improved his mother's condition. Dr. Patterson, however, who was in Chicago to consult with Robert that very day, was afraid that the Bradwells' visit and manner would tend to undo the good that has been accomplished. What trouble Mrs. Bradwell may give me with her interference I cannot foretell, Robert wrote. I understand she is a high priestess in a gang of spiritualists, and from what I have heard, it is to their interest that my mother should be at liberty to control herself and her property. This was, of course, one of the reasons Robert had his mother committed in the first place. His mother's feebleness of mind, as Robert called it, and her belief in spiritualism made her susceptible to thieves and sharpers. But he also feared for his mother's safety, saying that if she were freed, she would immediately go to Europe, and such a thing in her present state of mind would be productive of the most disturbing events to us all. Robert reiterated that he had no objection to Mary's visit to Springfield. In fact, he thought it would be beneficial, and he invited his aunt to visit Bellevue to see the place for herself, rather than rely on the word of Myra Bradwell. By early August, Robert had become so concerned about Myra Bradwell's conduct that he proposed a conference with her. Little did Robert know, however, to what extent the Bradwells truly were aiding and abetting his mother. On the very day Robert consulted Dr. Patterson in Chicago and explained his motivations to his aunt, Saturday, August 7th, Mary Lincoln had a meeting of her own. After spending Friday night in Mary's room, Myra Bradwell left Saturday morning for Chicago, but returned at 1 p.m. with someone the patient progress report described as a Mr. Wilkie of Chicago. Myra, Mary, Myra, and Mr. Wilkie then spent 2 hours in private conversation. Mr. Wilkie, in fact, was Frank B. Wilkie, the principal writer, editorial, and otherwise for the Chicago Times newspaper. He was described in 1868 as a man of large imagination, who wrote with ease and rapidity, preferred sentiment to dry logic, and hesitates at no subject. He was best known for his descriptive writing about individuals, his artistic and minute elaboration of details, and his ability to illuminate the character of anyone he chose. Sorry, my finger itches. Wilkie's visit was the fruition of Mary's initial July 28 request to bring Times editor William F. Story to Bellevue. At the time of his visit, with Dr. Patterson absent, none of the employees at the sanitarium knew who Wilkie was, although it did not take them long to find out. Dr. Patterson and Robert Lincoln were furious that Myra Bradwell had brought a man who was a complete stranger to them to visit Mary. There's Myra. She don't look like a feminist. She looks like a grandma. Their indignation was magnified by the fact that the visit was purposely arranged for a Saturday when both women knew Dr. Patterson would be away from the sanitarium. I can but regard this as a breach of hospitality and of common courtesy to me, Patterson wrote to Myra Bradwell the next day. He told her that she needed thereafter to get Robert Lincoln's approval for any future visits, especially when accompanied by a stranger, as well as for mailing or conveying any of Mary's letters. Robert called Myra a pest and a nuisance, and characterized her introduction of Mr. Wilkie as an outrage. In only 1 week, beginning with the first visit of Myra Bradwell to Bellevue Place, Mary Lincoln, who had previously been characterized as one of the best patients Dr. Patterson had ever treated, gathered her friends to foment for her freedom, practiced deceit and trickery upon the staff regarding her mail, and allowed an interview with a sensationalist journalist on a day she knew the doctor would be away. What other personal and professional stresses Dr. Patterson may have been under at the time are uncertain, but Myra Bradwell's meddling certainly affected him. Although Robert Lincoln told his aunt on August 7 that Dr. Patterson felt the Bradwells' influence was damaging Mary's progress, on August 9 the doctor told Robert that Mary was both mentally and physically greatly improved, and he saw no reason medically why she should not be allowed to leave Bellevue and go live with her sister in Springfield unless her condition should change for the worse. This sudden change of attitude and diagnosis is strange, unless he was so exasperated by the Bradwells and or possibly afraid of the publicity in the notorious Chicago Times that maybe he was ready to wash his hands of the whole affair. But the worst was yet to come. Over the ensuing 2 weeks, a flurry of activity occurred, with letters and visits being variously traded between all the principal people involved. Robert Lincoln, Mary Lincoln, Myra Bradwell, James Bradwell, Dr. Patterson, and Elizabeth Edwards. Robert and Myra had an apparently cordial conference on August 10, at which Myra conceded that Mary was not entirely right, but repeated her contention that Mary should not be confined to a sanitarium. Robert Riley noted in a letter to his aunt, "How completely recovered my mother really is shown by Mrs. B's, saying that she was to take out to her samples of dress goods she wants to buy. She has with her 7 trunks of clothing, and there are stored here 9 more." He told Mrs. Bradwell that any experiment of releasing his mother would be interesting to those who have no responsibility for the results. They can afterwards dismiss the matter with a shrug of the shoulders. He also told his aunt that Myra Bradwell convinced him she was not a spiritualist, as he had supposed. Despite her statements to Robert Lincoln, Myra Bradwell wrote to Elizabeth Edwards on August 11 that Mary had not one symptom of insanity. She urged the older sister to accept Mary into her home. "I am so sorry for the dear woman shut up in that place. When they tell me she is not restrained, I want to ask how they should like it themselves." Elizabeth Edwards, however, understood the game the Bradwells were playing, and between August 11th and August 14th, she wrote Robert 4 letters in which she never once suggested that Mary be released. Elizabeth apologized to Robert for her letter to Myra Bradwell of August 3rd, which Myra clearly had taken as an affirmation of her belief that an injustice had been done, and explained that she had only promised to visit Bellevue out of sympathy and kindness. Elizabeth truly was recovering from surgery and had no intention to visit, nor did she intend to allow Mary to come live with her. She told Robert on August 12th that she assumed any visit by Mary would be just that, a visit, accompanied by a nurse, and then a return to Bellevue. The peculiarities of her whole life have been so marked and well understood by me that I have not indulged the faintest hope of a permanent cure. The painful excitement of the past year only added to the malady, which was apparent to her family for years. Before the saddest events occurred, Elizabeth closed the August 12th letter with the clear and ingenuous statement, I am unwilling to urge any steps or assume any responsibility in her case. My present feeble health causing such nervous prostration as would render me a most unfit person to control an unsound mind. I am now satisfied that, understanding her propensities as you do, the course you have decided upon is the surest and wisest. Elizabeth Edwards showed herself to be somewhat of a coward regarding her sister. She lied to her about coming to visit Bellevue simply to indulge Mary, and she twice asked Robert not to tell her sister her true feelings about her mental state. She suggested instead that he say Dr. Patterson, County Court Judge Wallace, or Leonard Swett was to blame for Mary not being allowed to live in Springfield. I am unwilling to excite her by intimating anything unpleasant when she seems disposed to be amicable. When she later met with Myra Bradwell and said the opposite of what she wrote to Robert Lincoln, she practically called her nephew a bully and a liar. Subsequent historians have accused Robert of glib deceit when, on August 14, he informed Myra Bradwell that Mary could not make a visit to Springfield because Elizabeth Edwards was too ill to receive her. Robert told Myra what he had said numerous times previously, that he regretted the situation to be hoped a visit, and renewed acquaintance with her sister would do his mother good. To be fair, Elizabeth's letter explaining her recovery from a surgical operation was unknown until its recent discovery. But to accuse Robert Lincoln of an outright lie to keep his mother locked up seems quite unfair. The historical evidence already showed clearly that Elizabeth Edwards wanted no responsibility for her sister's keeping at all. Robert Lincoln did not confine himself to excuses, however, when communicating with Myra Bradwell on August 14th. I visited my mother on yesterday, and I could not help observing with pain a renewal in the degree of the same appearances which marked her in May, and which I had not noticed in my last few visits. I do not know of any outside cause for this unless it is the constant excitement she has been in since your first visit. While he had told her when they met on August 10 that he did not object to her visiting his mother, his last visit convinced him that Myra's influence had created a partial destruction of the good accomplished by 2 months and a half of quiet and freedom from all chance of excitement. He asked her to visit less often and not to bring people whom he did not know, nor did he want her to aid his mother in corresponding with anyone other than family. During this time, Mary Lincoln was not idle. On August 8th, she wrote a letter to James Bradwell that was perceptibly different from all her other correspondence to either him or his wife. Knowing well your great nobleness of heart, I can but well be assured that you will soon see that I am released from this place. Mrs. Bradwell will explain everything. I am sleeping very finely, and as I am perfectly sane, I do not desire to become insane. I pray you to see that justice is done immediately to me, for my mind is entirely clear and my health is perfectly good. With the high appreciation of yourself and your wife, son, and daughter, whom I love very much. Believe me, very truly, your friend, Mary Lincoln. What is most interesting about this letter is that it is so clear, succinct, and cogent, not rambling or erratic, and written in a very steady hand, yet its utter restraint, professionalism, and lack of overt emotionalism so present in Mary's other letters to the Bradwells, as well as the fact that it was addressed to James and not Myra Bradwell, suggests a deeper purpose than mere correspondence. In fact, this letter was written with such purposeful intent, it is not fanciful to call it almost a press release, for it easily could have been intended for inclusion in Wilkie's Chicago Times article as testimony to Mary's unjust imprisonment. This letter is another indication of Mary's strength of character, her resolve to achieve her goal, and her complete command of her freedom campaign. It does not suggest, however, that she was completely sane, because she could have had continuing symptoms and still created a clear statement such as this, as long as she avoided her typically delusional topics such as clothing and money. Around August 8th, Mary told Myra Bradwell that Robert had written to Elizabeth Edwards about the possibility of a visit. Mary's resentment of Robert was growing, however, and she wrote, "I rather think he would prefer my remaining here in his heart." She feverishly requested that the Bradwells not to forget to visit her, and twice told them to write to Elizabeth Edwards. This letter, part of the cache of recently discovered correspondence, plainly shows Mary's agitation with its large and shaky letters. Its 11 underlines its repetitions and the anxious impatience evident in her repeated use of the words urgent and urgently. It also offers further proof that her clothing mania continued, for she requested Myra to bring an exchange of Mary's trunks, as well as a small key to another trunk. In Mary's next letter to Myra Bradwell, written the following day, she was even more agitated, repetitious and rambling, paranoid that the Bradwells would forget her, and abandon her. Her paranoia also extended to the trunks full of clothing she requested. "Come to me, Mrs. B. Bring your husband, also bring those two trunks I wrote you about." A long Russian leather trunk and the tall black trunk marked ML fail me not. Come to me. I long to see you both. That's the same thing Dracula used to say. Come to me. Bring me also the key of the middle-sized trunk. I must have you near me again. Mary's agitation, so evident in her letters, also was evident to her doctors and attendants at Bellevue Place. The patient progress reports stated her to be more discontented since Myra Bradwell's July 7 visit with Frank Wilkie than during the past week. She wrote many letters, practically confined herself to her room, continued her capricious behavior of ordering but then not taking carriage rides, and disavowed any knowledge of when the Bradwells would visit. Mrs. Lincoln is frequently untruthful in her statements and exceedingly deceitful. Her lying and deceit should be put down to insanity, the report noted on July 16. Mary also was distressed about in Jesus. Mary also was distressed about an important paper that belonged to her that Judge Bradwell had in his possession. She desired very much to see him about it. Perhaps this explains one reason for Mary's dire fear of the Bradwells forgetting to visit or neglecting her. Robert perceived his mother was reverting to her previous nervousness, and perhaps he even knew that she was beginning to resent him. He wrote her a tenderly worded letter explaining that Elizabeth was too ill to consent to a visit, but he would try to arrange it soon, as there was nothing, he thought, would do her more good. "You must trust me that I can and will do everything that is for your good, and you must not allow yourself to think otherwise, for in that way you will only retard the recovery I am looking for, he concluded. Your stay with Dr. Patterson has plainly benefited you, and you must not undo all that has been done. Robert Lincoln here seems to have miscalculated the strength of his mother's resolve, as well as her growing resentment. He also had not learned something his aunt would later tell him, that his mother did not regard herself as insane, and every time he alluded to her mental state, it simply upset her. Robert Lincoln also seems to have underestimated Myra Bradwell's tenacity, which is strange since, as a Chicago attorney himself, he should have been well aware of her fights to be accepted at the bar and her legal activism. Despite his rebuke of August 14 and his limitations on her visits, Myra Bradwell did not relent. Instead, she went on the offensive. She still had the unpublished story written by Frank Wilkie of the Chicago Times, which she apparently which she was apparently holding for the appropriate time. She also paid a visit to Elizabeth Edwards. Elizabeth has been called the unsung hero of the insanity affair, but her inconsistent actions do not bear this out. Myra's silver lawyer's tongue, combined with Elizabeth's cowardice and fear of confrontation, caused Mary's sister to backpedal. Elizabeth wrote Robert on August 17th, who was at this time vacationing at Rye Beach, New Hampshire, to say that he had misunderstood her previous letters. It may be that a refusal to yield to her wishes at this crisis will greatly increase her disorder. I now say that if you will bring her down feeling perfectly willing to make the experiment, I promise to do all in my power for her comfort and recovery. On the same day that he received his aunt's capricious letter, Robert received upsetting news from Dr. Patterson. On yesterday, Judge and Mrs. Bradwell spent an hour in private consultation with Mrs. L., and they remained in my office about 5 minutes only, just long enough for the judge to say that Mrs. L. ought not longer to remain in confinement and that it was injuring her health. I showed them your letter from Mrs. Edwards, and they intimated that improper influences had been brought to bear upon Mrs. E. that had caused her to write such a letter. I presume they will continue their mission. If Mrs. E. shall change her illegible purpose, shall I remand the patient to her? The Bellevue Place patient progress report for that day contained this entry. So much discussion with the patient about going away tends to unsettle her mind and make her more discontented and should be stopped. She should be let alone, and this I have told Judge Bradwell. She should never have been subjected to this unnecessary excitement. It is now apparent that the frequent visits of Mrs. B have tended to stir up discontent and thus do harm. Finally, Robert Lincoln had had enough. He responded to Dr. Patterson with the terse telegram. Contents of letters sent by you show that your patient must not be allowed to leave you now. Cut off absolutely all communication with improper persons. I write today to you and Mrs. Edwards. Upon receiving Robert's telegram, Dr. Patterson immediately wrote to James Bradwell and courteously informed him that, at least until Robert's return in early September from New Hampshire, the Bradwells would not be allowed to visit Mary Lincoln. I am quite willing to believe that the object of your visits and the numerous letters of Mrs. Bradwell are well meant and not designed to promote unrest and discontent, but I have become fully convinced that such is their tendency and results. Patterson wrote, he said that the possibility of Mary's removal from Bellevue never should have been discussed with her, and promises never made, especially by people not in control of the situation. Such conversations had put Mary's mind in a constant ferment. A constant ferment. Bradwell replied by calling Dr. Patterson a hypocrite, since he had also discussed Mary's possible removal with her. But more than that, Bradwell was clearly incensed at what he called Mary's close confinement. He said she pines for liberty and that it was shameful to keep her locked up. I believe that such confinement is injurious to her in the extreme and calculated to drive her insane. Bradwell wrote. He closed his letter with a threat. Should you not allow her to visit Mrs. Edwards and insist on keeping her in close confinement, and I should be satisfied that the good of Mrs. Lincoln required it, as I certainly shall unless there is a change in her condition, I, as her legal adviser and friend, will see if a habeas corpus cannot open the door of Mrs. Lincoln's prison house, and it should have. Whether or not Mary was aware of her son's order is unclear. Patterson told the Bradwells they could write to her and create an explanation, although there is no evidence they did so. The patient progress report does show, however, that on August 18, Mary was more capricious and had a little tendency to irritability, and on August 19th, she was in a perturbed state of mind and shows great capriciousness about her food and her washing. The report said Mary asked every morning for cornbread and then did not eat it, but called for rolls. She then ordered griddle cakes for every supper, but did not eat them and called for rolls. Robert Lincoln's decision to bar the Bradwells from Bellevue Place was one he could not help but make. Both he and Dr. Patterson considered Mary's progress to be receding, and it is clear that Robert also perceived his mother's growing anger and suspicion toward him. Her resentment obviously was fueled, if not incited, by the Bradwells, as was her growing belief that the sanitarium had changed from a retreat to a prison. The evidence shows that Mary was complacent about her situation until the arrival of the Bradwells. The two lawyers whom Robert considered meddlers in affairs that were none of their business also offended his sense of family privacy. Yet, in seeking to drive the Bradwells away, Robert greatly misapprehended the indefatigability and sheer audacity. It was a mistake he would shortly be made to regret, as they forcibly transformed the battle over his mother's situation from a private family affair to an indecent public spectacle. And that's the end of chapter 6. Not 666, but 6. All right, Bob, that's all. Goodbye.